for populating our chat window in response to the question, what signs of a strong math culture are you seeing in classroom instruction? And I've just picked out a few themes that have evolved out of that pod. And phrases like problem solving, critical thinking, student talk and math talk, which I think indicates, many of you mentioned student engagement as well, and collaboration, not just student collaboration, but teacher, school leader, and system collaboration around the math program. A thank you to Sandra, who has given us a link to a resource itself. Appreciate that. And a couple of other key ideas that jumped out at me was the idea of seeing students using different models in terms of solving mathematical problems. The growth of student confidence is one, well, of course, a very important sign of a strong math culture. And then I like the phrase collective efficacy, that sense, well, maybe this math problem is hard to do, however, we can work on it, we have models we can bring to it, and students feel like that, teachers feel like that, and principals and vice principals feel like that as well. So those are a few of the key ideas that jumped out at me as I looked at that pod. I'd like to turn it over now to Mary.
Hi, Mary. Just a reminder to use your mute button on your phone. And if that seems to be an issue.
Okay, hold on.
Oh, there you are.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I'm glad. Second try. So as we look at the beautiful image on the screen before us, it really does give us a deep sense of appreciation. And so we would like to start this afternoon session by acknowledging, giving the land acknowledge of the Toronto where we are broadcasting from today. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. As a community, we have the responsibility to honor, care for, and respect all that creation gives to provide us with life. This includes land, water, air, fire, animals, plants, and our ancestors. The Anishinaabe peoples have utilized this, and for millennia, we would like to acknowledge their direct descendants, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations, as the rightful caretakers and the title holders of this land upon which we live, work, and conduct ourselves. We acknowledge our treaty relationship and responsibilities to both the land and these original peoples. We also recognize that this land is rich in pre-contact history and customs, which includes the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee. And since European contact has and continues to be home for Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. And it is in the spirit and intent of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement, whereby we will collectively care for and respect the land, water, animals, and each other in the interest of peace and friendship, and for the benefit of not only ourselves, but to our future descendants. And now we would like to invite each of you in different parts of the province just to pause a moment and reflect upon the ancestral lands where you are today, where you're participating from today. So we'll take a few moments to do that before we come back together. All right, thank you for doing that. We find this is a very respectful way to start our sessions, and we're going to be integrating this into every session that we put together. So it is my pleasure this afternoon to introduce the team.
Prince Edward District School Board.
To introduce the team that have put together the session for you today. And I'm going to start. I know Linda already introduced herself and myself, but you know there are some people who are just coming on. So Linda Massey, OPC Coordinator for LSA. I'm Mary Cordero, CPCO Coordinator for LSA. We have also with us this afternoon and part of the planning team, we have Marianne Cowan, who is the LSA facilitator for CPCO, and Bob Jackson, LSA facilitator for OPC. And you may know some of these people. We have Moses Velasquez, who is really part of LSA. He sits on the steering team and, has a large piece sharing this afternoon with you. And just to tell you a little bit about Moses, I mean, we can go on and on with introductions, but Moses is currently an education officer with the Ministry of Education. He is a primary junior math AQ instructor, and he's really taught everything from kindergarten to grade 8, including special education. So thank you for Moses for his preparation, contributions, and being with us this afternoon. And our special guest, our expert, not that everybody's an expert and even the practitioners have a lot of expertise to share, but we have Joyce Toner. And Joyce, again, there's a lot that could be said, and you could Google her and get all the other information. But just a couple things about Joyce. She's a Canadian educator, administrator, and author. She has really taught everything from elementary right through post-secondary and international students. She has had many leadership positions both in education and in mathematics in our province and beyond. And she is a recipient of a number of prestigious awards. Her special interest is in math achievement for all students, and she has, and you'll hear this in her presentation, a particular interest in supporting those with challenges, students and also schools. And Jen Collins, I don't think needs any introduction. She's already spoken a few times, but Jen will be our technical support, contributes to all our sessions. So thanks to all of you for being here, and I'm going to pass this on to Linda.
Thanks, Mary. So we're really excited about our afternoon session. We had a morning session, and it was just great, and both very, very large. So we're glad you got on and that we're all set to go. And in terms of the agenda, there's as we move our way through the session itself, I'll be talking very briefly about the LSA theory of action that frames all our work in the project itself. And then Moses will be speaking to the fundamentals of math, the power of and strong math instruction. We have Joyce speaking to the School Leader's Guide to Building and Sustaining Math Success and Creating a Culture of Learning for Math Success. As we wrap up later on, we'll be looking at future virtual session dates. We have some great resources, and there'll be a big downloadable pod close to the end where you can download some of these resources. And then, of course, we'll have our wrap-up, and we'll be asking you for feedback. So that's our session for this afternoon. And to set us going, itself, I remind you that LSA theory of action was developed and is an emergent theory of action based on the research of Ken Leithwood, who has worked with LSA now for 13 years and into the 14th year. And mathematics naturally fits under the rational path in terms of academic emphasis. But if we thought deeply about it, we would see that it also works within the paths of emotions, organization, and the family path as well. So we're all set to go, and I'm very happy to turn things over to Moses.
Thank you, Linda. Jen, can you just confirm that you all can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Fantastic. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted that I can spend some time with you this afternoon to talk about a couple of things. Jen, we can go on to the next slide. The two things that I want to focus in on during my time with you are these two items. When we use the word fundamentals of math, what does that mean? Where do we situate that in our current context here in Ontario as leaders, as people who are supporting teachers as they think about how they might shift or enhance their practice as it relates to mathematics education? And then the second thing that I want to share with you all is this concept that I've been playing around with for a number of years, and it's the power of and. That's going to become hopefully a bit clearer as we move through our time together. So we can go on to the next slide, Jen. what you see in front of you is a description of something called leadership content knowledge. And this comes from the work of Stein and Nelson in 2003. These two researchers were trying to figure out, how much content knowledge in any subject, in any given subject, does a leader need in order to help her or his teachers shift their practice in that subject area. So if you look on the left-hand side under that title, Leadership Content Knowledge, we can define leadership content knowledge as the knowledge of a subject that enables you, a leader, to help others, for example, teachers, get better at the teaching of the subject. So the way that Stein and Nelson kind of unpack that knowledge, they kind of, separate it into three ideas. So when we think about the knowledge of a subject that you need to help others get better at teaching that subject, we can think of it as understanding what strong instruction looks like. So as a leader, when you are walking through schools and you are looking into classrooms and you're seeing what's happening in those classrooms, in particular during math learning time, can you identify what strong instruction looks like? Is it there? And then that takes us actually to the second component of leadership content knowledge, and that's how can you encourage strong instruction when it's not there, when it's not evident. And then all of this encouragement actually is situated within a culture of learning. And that as a leader, you are conscious of how things are done, how learning is done, not just for students in your building, but also for the adults, the staff that work in service of student learning. You have influence over the factors and the conditions that shape this culture of learning. So when you know what strong instruction is, what it looks like in mathematics, and you are encouraging it when it's not evident, you are building shaping a culture of learning. Now, I wanted to situate our learning this afternoon under this concept of Stein and Nelson of leadership content knowledge, because I think it's important for us as leaders to, whenever we're engaged in learning around mathematics education, that we have a frame of reference to go back to. And so this afternoon and ongoing, when you are involved in mathematics professional learning for leadership, think about how what you've learned can help you understand what strong instruction looks like. Or maybe how it's going to help you as a leader encourage strong instruction when it's not evident. Or perhaps even how what you've learned about mathematics education can help you create a culture of learning. Certainly, we're going to see some overlap, but I think it's incredibly helpful for us as learning leaders to be able to situate any kind of math professional learning that we engage in within a framework that really supports our learning as leaders. So I'm hoping that throughout the rest of our time this afternoon, there are going to be some very explicit times where we'll bring you back to this frame, back to this theoretical framework, if you will, and give you time to kind of consider what's been shared with this particular lens. So that being said, let's continue moving forward. I have a couple of questions that I'm going to give you time to consider individually if you're participating alone or as a team. But the first question is this: what images or concepts come to mind when we hear the words strong math instruction? What picture would you paint? And then I want to contrast that with this second question: what images come to mind when you hear the term back to basics? So I'm going to give you, I'll check in with you in about 4 minutes, but I'm going to give you 4 minutes to think about this individually or perhaps talk about it as a team. And how would you populate these chat boxes? Again, the first one is in response to what images do you think of when you hear strong math instruction or even concepts? And then when you hear the term back to basics, what does that conjure up for you? Okay, so I'll check in with you in about 4 minutes to see how we're doing with the chat pod. Great. Thank you so much, everybody. If you are new to the Adobe Connect platform, you may not have noticed that if on the right-hand side of each chat pod, you can see a scroll bar. So as people have been populating the chat pod, it just provides more room. So to be able to view comments, you can just scroll up and down, and that's what I've been doing the last 4 minutes here. And it's what I find fascinating is that when we hear the words collectively as a group, when we hear the word strong math instruction, this isn't about only what teachers are doing. Certainly, we have clarity on what teachers are doing when it comes to strong math instruction, but we see the role that students play actively in their mathematics education, right? And that we have notions of really effective assessment happening and evaluation in a strong mathematics program, and when we think about math instruction. So I can certainly appreciate this very robust and fulsome understanding of what we mean by strong math instruction. What's interesting is that if we look on the right-hand side chat pod and we see what conjures up in our collective minds around the terms back to basics, I mean, reading what some of you have written, it actually takes me back a little bit. Even traumatically might be the word to use to describe my experience, to my own, what it was like for me as a student coming up in the elementary grades. Math certainly for me was about precision and speed. That's really what it was. So much so, I mean, it was that understanding of being a mathematician, being equivalent to being quick, certainly was pervasive for all of my schooling. And it was not until I actually, well, I'm going to let you on a little secret. Mary did share that I am a math AQ instructor, and my pursuit of a primary junior specialist in math was not actually because I thought I was a good math student. I mean, I did fine. Like, I think I went up to grade 12, and I think I graduated with like a 75 or something in grade 12 math, but it was not because I had any real understanding of mathematics. I just knew how to listen well to the teacher, and when he explained how to do something, I just figured out a way of understanding that so that I could do it on my own. But it wasn't rooted in actually any mathematical understanding. And so as I engaged in my own professional learning around what mathematics education can be, in particular in the elementary grades, what came to light for me was that I had an understanding of some basics in terms of math, but there was so much more, that we take the term basics for granted, that it is so much more than the way we would have defined basics from our own childhood, our own experiences. Research in mathematics education has come leaps and bounds, and we've learned so much more about how to really provide depth even in the basics, that it isn't as surface as we think it is. It's just unfortunate that with the term back to basics, we have this visceral reaction. I'm going to suggest it's because of our own experiences, certainly not for us, for me, certainly. I had such, really not so great experiences in the elementary grades. I don't know if you ever played Around the World, but you want to talk about stress. Around the World with multiplication facts, when you're a grade 3 student, that's scary stuff. But because of those experiences for me, certainly, when I hear the word back to basics, that's what I think of. And I'm not interested in perpetuating or creating another generation of students like me that had that misconception. And I think that we have the weight of a lot of math education research behind us that's supporting us to say that there is more to this conversation around basics than our experiences tells us. So it's within this context that I want us to move forward in thinking about the fundamentals of math. Thank you so much, everyone, for your great contributions there. Jen, we can go on to the next slide. When we think about the fundamentals of math, the question is where do we situate this when we think about math pedagogy, or when we think about the pedagogy involved in mathematics education? Certainly, I'm going to go through some ideas, and you're going to feel some shifting of ideas and some pendulum swinging, if you will. Many, if you were to ask, if we were to survey people in the province, teachers in particular, about what should an ideal math program look like, we might hear some people say, well, it should be, and Jen, we can go to this first one, It should be about technical proficiency. We need students to be able to, for example, work well with numbers and be proficient with using numbers, understanding them. That's what a mathematics education should result in. Other people will say, but it's not technical proficiency. It should be about conceptual understanding. And so what we see here is that on one hand, people are saying it's about technical proficiency. Other people are saying, on the other hand, it's about conceptual understanding. That it isn't about just the mechanics of math or simple manipulation of numbers, that we manipulate numbers in a particular way in our understanding of how those numbers work. So if we continued with this survey, some people in the province would say that it's about guided learning, that it's about having a teacher that has some expertise in this subject area, and they guide students along in this learning, right? And that it is constantly the teacher that is the holder, if you will, of knowledge, right, in this subject area. And others will say, well, actually, it's not guided learning, but rather it's investigation, that students don't need a sage on the stage when it comes to mathematics, that what they actually need is just meaningful opportunities to investigate. So if we continue with this survey, other people, they might say that it's about individual activities. This is about students needing to be able to perform mathematics on their own independently with accuracy, and they just need to do it alone, and they can learn about this in a siloed, individual kind of way. And we know, though, that other people will say, no, it's about group activities, that if we really want to deepen student learning in mathematics, it needs to be done in community. It needs to be done building on each other's ideas. And we already have discussions and we talk about knowledge building as a meaningful way to build on each other's ideas and understandings, to get clarity about what we're thinking about or our understanding of our current understanding. And so certainly here we see a nice complement to that in mathematics, when students are involved in group work, that there's a richness that they gain in the learning that you can't attain individually. And then finally, some people might say that it's about skill development, that it's only about mastery, and that students cannot move from one concept to another in mathematics unless they have mastered a particular skill. And so that's the way we should think about math, that we should be building these skills in a successive way and looking at mastery. And then others would say, well, it's not actually about skill development, it's about problem solving. It's about being able to look at real situations in the world and understanding the mathematics that can emerge or the mathematics that we need to bring to the fore if we're going to solve this problem. And so what's interesting is that we've got these two hands, if you will, of what mathematics education should be. We have this polarization. We have this notion of, Jen, can you go to the next click? Of or. It's technical proficiency or it's conceptual understanding. It's guided learning or it's investigation. It's individual activities or it's group activities. It's skill development or it's problem solving. This is what's interesting is that I think in this kind of binary thinking in mathematics education, we're really struggling with, well, where does the fundamentals fit? What I want to suggest to you is this, and we can go to the next slide, that it isn't about or, it actually is about and. That it's all on the same hand. It isn't one hand versus the other. The fundamentals of math is not about pushing one particular hand, quote unquote, if you will, over another. It is about understanding that when we have technical proficiency and conceptual understanding in our mathematics education programs, and when we have guided learning and investigation, individual activities and group activities, we have skill development and problem solving, when that's all involved in a robust mathematics education program, where does the fundamentals fit in that context? So I really wanted to just situate our understanding of the fundamentals in this particular context, that we're not I don't think that there is a suggestion at all that one of these things is more important than the other. They're all important. And our job as educators is to figure out in what situations are we bringing those understandings around the fundamentals to the fore. This, interestingly enough, this concept of and, while it wasn't articulated this way exactly, the report in 2003 of the expert panel on early math in Ontario, our experts at that time, this is what they articulated. And so I share that with you in a very explicit way to suggest that this is something that we've known in our province for a long, long time. And we want to ensure that the fundamentals, discussions on the fundamentals, just orients us or allows for some focus on some particular concepts within this context. So let's move on. The fundamentals of math are categorized into 5 groups. And they're listed here for you: working with numbers, being able to recognize and apply an understanding of number properties, mastering math facts, developing mental math skills, and then developing proficiency with operations. When we talk about these 5 categories of fundamentals, concepts, and skills, you can see here an emphasis on number and operations and being able to do things in the head, having some flexibility with these ideas in the head. Flexibility is what's key here. So when we think about these 5 categories, we can go to the next slide, Jen. I want to draw your attention to this quote from the guide, the teacher's guide for the fundamentals in mathematics. So the guide focuses attention on the content of expectations that deal with fundamental mathematics concepts and skills, specifically expectations in the number sense and numeration strand and expectations that relate to number properties in the patterning and algebra strand. That's a lot of language, and I think we can think about it by simply this next statement here. We'll go to the next slide. A fulsome math program is more than the number sense and numeration strand with a small portion of patterning and algebra expectations. This document, in my estimation, allows us to focus on the expectations that are articulated in the number sense and numeration strand, as well as some of the expectations in the patterning and algebra curriculum. So we still have the entire curriculum that we are expecting our students to engage in, but the teacher's guide allows us focus on these particular expectations. And rightly so. These are, one can very articulately argue that when we focus on these particular strands or expectations, we will see them, they emerge in the other strands, right? Like numbers are going to be everywhere in our math curriculum. If you're talking about data management, it's going to be there. But the point is that the fundamentals gives us that kind of clarity that I think we need in terms of understanding what we mean by the basics and as it relates to numeracy. So those 5 categories are much more than what the basics were when I was in school. Much, much more. To this day, I still struggle with being able to manipulate adding two-digit numbers in my head. I want to stack them, and I want to paper, and I want to write it out, and start with my ones column and then move over to the tens. And when I don't have to, if I had flexibility with number, if I understood how numbers work and build onto one another, I probably could handle it in my head, but that was not something that was emphasized for me. So when we consider the basics, when we think about the fundamentals, I'm going to encourage you to think about the fundamentals being the expanded understanding of the basics. And we can go on to, I think, my next slide, which is my final one. I just want to draw your attention back to this idea of leadership content knowledge. I'm hoping that some ideas that I've shared with you can inform your understanding of what strong mathematics instruction looks like. I'm hoping that something that I've shared with you can help you understand how you might encourage your teachers in developing strong math instruction when it's not evident. And then finally, I hope that something that I've shared with you can contribute to the efforts that you've already embarked on in your buildings in terms of creating a culture of learning. I'm going to encourage you, if you get a chance, to take a look at Stein and Nelson's work. For those of you on the line that I've been speaking about mostly about the school context, but Stein and Nelson actually do a really good job of explaining even the role a superintendent might play in terms of developing leadership content knowledge. So if you have some interest there, I'm going to encourage you to take a look at that research. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time. I'm going to pass things over to, I think it's Bob?
Yes, it is, Moses. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much for that presentation and explanation on the fundamentals of math. And thanks again to those people who populated the chat boxes where you talked about what strong math instruction looks like and what back to the basics, what images that conjured up. Because it really is a dichotomy, and as Moses pointed out, we need to think more of these things as an and. And his explanation of the fundamentals of math and the power of and were just excellent in making us think, as he said, that the fundamentals in the 5 categories are more than just the basics, and it's an expanded understanding. So with that in mind and the expanded understanding, we have a chat box for you. And based on what you just heard, what resonated with you and how might it impact the work you're doing at your school and district level? Take some time, think about that as an individual, populate the chat box, piggyback on other people's ideas as a team, have a discussion, post the collective thoughts of your team. I learned today, you always learn something new. I learned that silent time is good in chat boxes. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes of silent time to generate your thoughts and build on the ideas of others.
Joyce Toner. Joyce Toner.
And we've just come up to 5 minutes. I thank you for all your thoughts in the chat box. There were some common themes and common threads that ran through your discussion. The idea of balanced math and the importance of having a balanced math program was certainly one that was in there. I saw instructional core, which Mary Jean Gallagher would be elated to see that emphasized in your chat box. People talked about the importance of open questions, and certainly later on Moses is going to share an EQAO report that analyzed some of the fundamentals of math, and certainly I noted it was the open response type questions that were giving our students difficulty there in that report. And certainly everyone realized it's not a back to the basics, that it's much more than just a back to the basics. And so we have to think of the fundamentals of math, of not being those images of back to the basics that we saw in the earlier chat box. And of course there was a lot of comments on the power of and if you were at our last symposium, Stephen Katz made the same comment, had a chapter in his book, or a section in his book too, about the power of and how it is so important in education. So I'll just give you another minute to wrap up any last comments or piggyback on anything that you read in there before we turn it over to Joyce. Okay, usually in our virtual sessions we have voices from the field. We don't have a specific school or voices from the field, but I think what we have for you is a voice from the field and so much more. I'm just going to turn it over to Joyce Toner, who is going to provide information about the book that you see on the screen right now and give you practical examples of how you can build and sustain math success. It's all yours, Joyce.
Thanks, Bob. I hope everyone can hear me. We had a little telephone blip last time. I hope you're hearing me now.
We can.
Great. Good afternoon. I'm very pleased to share an introduction to a resource that provides practical leadership ideas for improving student achievement in mathematics. I'm also going to share with you my personal experience with some of the things that take place in the book, and I want to give you the context and the background of how this book came to be. The audience for this book is school principals and system leaders. It doesn't mean that others in the field certainly can't pull from it, but it really is for school principals and system leaders. It describes processes and specific samples of elements of tools that have successfully been used to improve student understanding and performance in mathematics. It really is an evidence-based presentation of the lived experiences of principals who applied specific systematic leadership moves. And whether you want to engage with the book after the webinar or not, I hope to share some provocative questions and also some complementary resources that will help you in your school improvement efforts. I kind of want to set the context on this next slide by looking at who wrote this book. The authors of this book are Doug Duff and Dr. Marion Small. Doug Duff recently retired from being a principal coach at the Thames Valley District School Board. He'd served for many years as an elementary school principal, and he was seconded working for a publisher for many years as a senior math consultant. He had led the curriculum, math, science, technology at the board, and he's a multi-grade author of textbooks, and he's the current author of Math Up School, which connects somewhat to this particular book. He's a leadership speaker and a professional learning speaker, and currently he's in demand quite a bit, just sharing what happened at his schools and how it can be helpful to others. Most of you may know Dr. Marion Small from some of her work. She was the former Dean of Education at the University of New Brunswick. She is a global math educator and consultant. She's authored 7 text series from K to 12. They're considered quite progressive in the way that they approach mathematics. She has been the leader of Big Ideas, particularly in mathematics, and she is the current author of Math Up Classroom, which is another resource for teachers to use with their kids and their students in the classroom. She, of course, is a leadership speaker and a professional learning speaker. So those are the two people that worked on this book, and the way they got together is that they were having experiences and talking to each other about improvement in schools. So there are many books that are available about school improvement in the field that provide theoretical supports, and there's plenty of research about leadership practices and styles. And what seemed to be missing was the voice of a principal who had lived the experience of making improvements in their students and the whole school math performance at their school. Dr. Marion Small had global experience and expertise in the field of teaching and learning, and as Doug and Marion were talking together, they talked about should they bring their two experiences together to provide a practical guide for principals and system leaders. Marion Small had done a lot of work with particularly teachers, and she was seeing that it always worked better in schools where the principal was actively engaged. And Doug had personal experience with improving his school. So the book will provide answers to why we should change and how to influence change in instruction that we should be able to see in our students' work samples. It really is about building common content and pedagogical understanding and language across the school, whether it's K to 8 or 9 to 12. On the next slide, we'll kind of look back at Stein and Nelson's work. So we have, as Moses introduced us to, this leadership content knowledge. So as a leader of a school, how much math do we need to know? Well, we certainly need to know what strong instruction looks like so we can sort of assess how things are going. We have to know how to encourage strong instruction when it is not evident. So how do we help our teachers to move on in their instruction and to feel that they're also learners and full participants? And thirdly, how do we create the culture of learning? So as I work through some of the parts of the book, I'll try to help you connect back to those 3 elements that we're trying to achieve so our kids can do better. On the next slide, we'll look at the school improvement questions that started this whole journey. The school improvement elements in the book started with one principal's journey. After his secondment as a senior math consultant, Doug had returned to lead at an elementary school in his board. And like most of us, he moved to the school, he's gathering information, he's looking at the social pieces in his school, he's looking at the hard data about his school, and he's beginning to ask questions when he starts to delve into that student achievement data. And he really noticed that the kids in his school were doing well in literacy, but not in mathematics. And he started to question, well, why is this happening? Certainly if they're capable of learning to read and write and express their thinking, then certainly they should be able to do the same in mathematics. So these were some of the questions he asked himself. So he talked about the disparity, like why is the gap so different between literacy and mathematics? He talked about how am I going to lead all these teachers? There's a lot of grades, there's a lot of teachers, and what information is going to give me the right kind of information so we can move forward. The school at the time, it was in a rural setting, kind of a village, but it had a catchment area, and he had about 650 students or so. And again, the disparity between literacy and math was very problematic to Doug. He was quite concerned about it. On the next slide, I'll give you some more of the questions that Doug's looking at. He continued to think about the evidence of student learning of mathematics at his new school, and he began to reflect on what he'd learned about effective math instruction. He thought about what he had learned from Marion about what children can learn through open and parallel tasks. And he wondered if his staff would be open to some of these particular ways of teaching and learning. And these are the questions he started to look at. So what had he learned from Marion Small's progressive work? What in the research can inform what he should be doing? And what kind of assessments could his teachers be using so that they could figure out what was going on with the kids in the school? He was really looking at what does that strong instruction look like? And then he turned to the bigger questions a lot of us have as we're leading schools, and those are about leadership. So what should he be doing? What was his role? How could he build the capacity and efficacy of his teachers? And he really felt strongly that assessment literacy was a huge part of moving the school forward. So he saw that as really a part of how he's going to encourage the strong instruction when it was not evident in the school. So on the next slide, I'll show you kind of what Doug came up with. He looked at sort of 3 different elements of school improvement. He thought about the data and assessment literacy, like what would he need to improve mathematics in his school. And he reflected a little bit about, like in literacy, there's all kinds of tools that we've been given over the years where we're able to assess almost on a daily basis how kids are doing. Where are they on that continuum? But there seemed to be sort of a lack of that kind of development for numeracy. He realized he was going to have to create some of these himself. He also was concerned that his teachers, were they really understanding how they could look at the student's piece of work and figure out the next part of learning that that student needed? He also reviewed the research and decided that the best impact, the best, bang for the buck sort of thing is that he could really work on number sense and the relationships with the numbers, and that would cross all strands. It would go from K to 8, and it might be able to help him to move a whole school. And finally, he looked at the leadership moves for capacity building. So what is it that you can do in your school to help everybody come along and move toward a very focused direction? And the next slide is going to tell you what happened next. So what Doug did was he created a cyclical process. A lot of us have looked at school improvement cycles, and he followed one of these, and he put into it inquiry and sort of action-based research within his school with differentiated assessments. And he looked at the school, and he really focused on what flexible number sense, what he calls connected number sense, which is about the relationships within numbers, between numbers, and across groups of numbers. And then he led the school as a co-learner. And this is huge because I got a very kind introduction at the beginning of this, and the word expert was used. I'm not real comfortable with that because I really think I'm a co-learner. I'm always learning more about mathematics. And in fact, last week I was at a session, and I had sort of this aha moment about linear equations. And I thought to myself, why don't I know this? And I think many teachers have that same feeling as they learn more about mathematics. And why didn't we know this before? And how can we kind of put this into our work with kids? So in order to move this along, Doug chose something he thought would be manageable and also would provide teachers with what I call cognitive frameworks. So for instance, you know how in literacy we work with graphic organizers, we work with different models to help kids to organize their thinking maybe before they write or to organize their thinking as they're reading materials. He chose the models of open number line, decomposition, and the parts-whole relationship. And those were the vehicles that he drove his assessment and improvement measures. So his focus was on the thinking and relationships within, between, and among numbers and not on memorization. I don't know if you've had the same experience, but certainly when I'd be working with kids, and some of them could rattle off their facts very quickly, but I soon came to know as a teacher that they had memorized words and were repeating them, but they didn't really, when they said those words, envision the quantity they were talking about or the magnitude of the numbers that maybe they were working with. So Doug puts this in place, and on the next slide, we'll have a look at what the results were. So in his school, the mathematics went up on the provincial results, both in grade 3 and grade 6. And what he was surprised at, but encouraged by, was that the school literacy results also went up. Now, when this happened, of course, principals, I'm sure you have the same thing in your board. We talk to each other. What's happening in your school? What are you doing about this problem? How are you trying to solve this issue? And principal colleagues began to talk with Doug about his process. And the teachers in his school were also pretty enthused about the changes they were seeing. They felt very excited about it. They started to talk to teachers in their school and other teachers outside of the school. And then after that, shortly after that, Doug moved to a new school and replicated the process. So during this time, Doug had talked to me. I was at a school. It was a school that had very high achievement, and my data did not really indicate that we needed to be working on the mathematics. So I wasn't able to sort of work on it at the same time as Doug. But in my former life, I had been a student achievement officer, and I'd worked with these great schools in the London district, and we'd had a lot of excitement and experience in changing literacy. So I was always interested in, okay, this happened in one school. Can it be replicated? And can it be sustained? So I kind of followed Doug's data as he went through his first school and then looked at as he went to the second school. And at the same time, I was moved to another school, and it was a core school, a very low-performing school, and so I kind of had my chance to try my own hand at working on some of these things. So let's move to the next slide. So Doug started to sort of have this grassroots effect. So there were principals talking to each other. There were some principals in a larger city in the board. There were some principals in my area, a smaller town with some rural schools around it. And principals started to sort of get together after school and talk about what was happening. And they started to try to replicate that. So sort of in the beginning of this, there were about probably in the near the latter part of when Doug moved schools, there were probably about 10 schools, a lot of them struggling schools, who got together to try to work on this and see how it went. And what happened was that 90% of those low-performing schools broke the downward trend in math achievement on their provincial assessments. So in EQAO, these would be schools who had stagnated for 3 to 5 years or had actually been slipping down each year, despite the really big efforts of the board and all the support from leaders and teachers. There was still some problems kind of getting that going. And of those low-performing schools, 66% of them experienced double-digit math improvements on the assessments. And from my work before, I knew that that was unusual. You would hope for some improvement. You would be happy with any improvement, but to get double-digit improvements, you felt like you were really onto something that was working for the teachers and the students. So in my particular situation, I was working at that core school in a small town, and we were the kind of school where we were serving breakfast and lunch because kids were not coming to school with food. We were doing a lot of social work, and we started to then to really focus in improving their chances by looking at academically this math piece. It was during sort of the last labor movement, so there was a lot of challenges, but we did start working, and in 3 months' time, our grade 3s improved by 30%, and our grade 6s improved by 12%. And since that time, the school's been able to maintain that and to keep nudging forward in small steps. So to me, that I started to think, okay, I'm able to replicate this, and I can tailor it to my school, but I'm also seeing that it's being sustained. And so that was pretty exciting for me, and that is kind of where all of this came from, where the idea for the book came from. If you go to the next slide, I would like to share with you a bit of a story from a school in our board. They were the lowest achieving school, and they were in a core area. Lots of ESL kids, lots of marginalized families, but they worked very hard on this process, the school improvement cycle, working with mathematical models, and things started to turn in their school. And I want to share with you a particular event. I went to visit. We started visiting each other's schools just to check in on how things were and to get other ideas. And I remember a particularly encouraging meeting at this school. It was a meeting to look at all the different classrooms, but then we had a chance to step into a situation where some kids who were identified with special needs were working together. And some of these kids would refuse to come to school, they wouldn't stay in class, there was all these problems, but I was able to watch them use and articulate number sense using a physical open number line. And it was very moving to see this happen. And then I thought, this is good for everybody. So I went back to my school, and I was working in the classroom, and there was a gifted student who was very quick to finish things, and I asked that student, can you show me that with a different model? And the gifted student kind of stopped and didn't know what to do. And it actually challenged that student to move them on. So there seems to be something within this work that seems to help a lot of kids. So if we move to the next slide, I can talk to you what was the impetus for getting this book to happen. And I think a lot of principals respect the theoretical leadership sources that are out there. Many of them, though, are ready to move to a how-do-I-do-it situation. So they understand the change theory, but putting it into practice is really challenging, as many of us who are principals know. And Dr. Marion's small support for teachers is integral, because if principals understand it and learn about it, they can then support their teachers. So they decided that this resource would help people to focus their school improvement on student performance, and they'd also build sort of that assessment literacy within the schools. And so that's kind of why they decided to write the book. On the next slide, we'll just look at a few chapter titles so you can get an idea of what it's like. The first one is, what does a great math school look like? And I think we're always trying to identify that for ourselves, and it's sort of an emerging thing, I think, for a lot of people. You learn a little bit, you see it, then you learn a little bit more, you recognize other things. The second chapter, laying the foundation for a strong math culture in your school. And the third, overcoming resistance and getting buy-in. And those are all really important pieces to improving the school. And that, I think, a lot of principals, those are the questions they would ask when they came to my school. Well, how did you get started? How did you know what to look for? How did you know the culture was changing? What did you do when the teachers kind of gave you a little, that kind of thing? The other chapters, if we move to the next slide, you'll see, are looking at the culture for signs. So you'd be looking at just at students, their work and their conversations, thinking about what teachers, their work and their conversations, and looking at how that culture is moving out of the school. So we kind of like to talk about it as during the grassroots process of this whole event, the changes began first in the classroom. Things would sort of improve, and then teachers would feel confident, and the kids would be excited, and they would start to hang it in the walls on the outside of the school. So it moved from the classroom sort of into the public space, so people were really thinking about it more during the day and seeing the samples. I recall clearly several students who would not write anything on a piece of paper, who would have behavior problems during math. They were clearly struggling and unhappy, running down the hall to show me their work because they had learned how to use a number line. And I think for spec ed kids in particular who have memory issues, they didn't have to hold it in their mind anymore. They could actually do their thinking on the paper, and it was just so freeing for them. It was very exciting. Also, the last chapter is monitoring and sustaining improvement. And I think we all want to see improvement in our school, but we want to know that it's deep, that it's anchored, that it's rooted. So if I leave the school, if another principal leaves the school, that what we've learned is maintained and built upon in the future. So what you could hope to learn from this book is a cycle. How do you establish the strong culture? What do you do? How to develop common tasks, how to develop assessment criteria and get the buy-in, monitoring and supporting, and sustaining improvement. So I'm going to show you next some samples from the book to give you an idea of what's in there. So if you're thinking about looking at establishing a strong math culture, this is just lifted from the book. It's on page 10. a simple table. I see great math when, it lists some things for you. What you won't see, so we have what I should see, what I won't see, and how you will know. So just sort of some helpful support. So when you're looking at a classroom and the math culture in the school. On the next slide, you'll see another sample. This is one of the common tasks. And I think some people find this a little curious because a lot of our work over the last few years has been on using tasks that were very rich, some really deep problem-solving tasks, and they certainly have a lot of their place, and they're really the focus of where we want to be. But the common tasks for this particular movement in school improvement were open tasks. So you can see there was 4 things a child could choose, a student could choose to work on. It didn't matter which one they chose, because whatever they did in their work, we would be able to glean something from what they did or didn't know. And they were just asked to show 2 different ways to find the answer. And in this particular case, subtraction was trying to get at additive reasoning. And students who chose 10 minus 3, it also gave us an insight to either their comfort level, their confidence, those types of things, as well as their actual mathematical knowledge. So there are samples of common tasks that you could use, or that you could think about, well, if I'm trying to get a particular concept, how could we sort of create our own common tasks? The next slide gives you an example of what the principals in our small group that were working in the beginning, they really thought that this was the game changer. So a lot of our experience had been working with rich problems from different sources, and then we would moderate together to find levels. And we all worked hard at doing that, but we often found that after we leveled the work, the actual conceptual or pedagogical teaching didn't happen afterward. So in this case, you had the student work, and it's all based on what the student work, and you use what you might call a criteria-based tally. Very simple. You just see if you see it in the work or not. So for example, did you see them use the number line or not? Did they have any 10 frames? They did or they didn't. Do they think subtraction is only about takeaway? Could you tell that? They did or they didn't. And as staff filled this out, they started to see what was missing. What are those conceptual pieces or models our kids don't seem to know about? And that then informed the professional learning we needed to start on. So there's some samples like that in the book if you're interested in that. The next slide gives you questions from the book that talks about when you're trying to monitor and support improvement, what are the questions you could ask a teacher, what are the questions you can ask a student, and how are the ways that you can sort of have a look at, are things moving and are we sustaining anything of what we have learned? The thinking in the book is very much centered around that any learning is present in the student work. So if a student is not able to show you in a written format, we of course differentiate for kids. And from kindergarten all the way through secondary, there are ways of looking at work and finding out what are those pieces that students do or do not understand, and then supporting teachers and helping their kids learn those pieces. So that's kind of what the book involves. So at the very end of the book, there's a great summary that I really like. And on the next slide, we'll have a look at that. And these are the elements of the principal's role that have a deep impact on teacher confidence and efficacy. So when you look at this, focused intentionality. So I've worked with many teachers who were trying to present a good solid curriculum and supports for their kids. But if I would ask them, what are you trying to evoke from your students in this lesson? Sometimes they couldn't tell me. It just wasn't intentional enough. So trying to help teachers become more focused in their work and more intentional is really important to the process. The second bullet is urgent patience. So it's kind of a dichotomy there, but actually we have to have that urgency because kids can't wait too long, or we know that there are gaps that develop and that they're not able to move forward as we would want. Their life chances and their life choices are affected by our ability or inability to help them. So that urgency is important. But the patience comes along with, we were always trying to work with and learn with our teachers in a patient manner because they are students as well. We're all students of mathematics. And finally, regulated accountability. So everybody in the school is accountable, all grades, all divisions, all members of staff, and that we use data to see how we're doing. And it's not for blame, but to see where the next step should come for our teaching and learning. So I told you in the beginning that there are some resources that, whether you engage with the book or not, you're going to be able to use to get some good questions to work on. And these come from the London West team, which is great because they've looked at the book and they prepared a book study guide in the event you do. Even if you don't buy the book, there are questions in the guide that will help you. The second one is the Strong Mathematics Culture, a conversation starter to support administrators. So again, getting those questions that will evoke thinking, that will provoke some movement in your school. And finally, there's a third one, the School Leader's Guide to Building and Sustaining Math Success. And this describes a little bit more about the book and, again, provides supports for principals who want to talk to teachers, to talk to each other, and for superintendents to talk to their principals about some of the things that are at the heart of school improvement. So in closing, I just want to connect back to the leadership content knowledge we were talking about that Moses provided for us in the beginning. So on the next slide, we'll just look at those chapters one more time that connect them. So if I'm a principal and I'm struggling with what good math instruction should look like, I should probably be looking at the first 3 chapters. The first chapter is very direct, but on the second one, it talks about artifacts in a school that tell you that your math culture is developing, and those, of course, are some of the look-fors. And in Chapter 3, when you're talking about monitoring and sustaining, when you're monitoring changes in schools, you are looking for that strong instruction. So there's help in that chapter as well. If you're trying to encourage strong instruction because you're not seeing it in the school or more specifically in the student work, you want to be looking at Chapters 4, 5, and 6 because they talk about the strong math culture, but they talk about how you encourage with teachers, students, and also outside of the school, how you can make encourage that strong instruction. So for example, we talked about in our groups with our other principals who are trying this out, we talked about how if it's happening in the classroom and it starts to kind of come out into the hallways, you start to see it in the hallways, you start to see some principals started to maximize that, and they would put up questions in the hallway, or they would build number lines in the hallway that kids could place numbers on. And then it would start to sort of push through the door of the front of the school, and it would go out into the community. So there would be actually a problem on the school sign that if people were driving by and parents were dropping off kids, they would see a math problem they could even think about and talk with their children. There was some movement in doing some summer resources that when kids went home in the summer, that they would be able to work with some of the models that they had learned that year. So it really was a grassroots movement of principals kind of working on what Doug had shown us, trying to make sense of it, adapting it to our schools. And this book really is a compilation of some of that. I hope that you've been able to kind of get a sense of the book, whether you tend to engage in it or not, because if you don't, there's probably questions on those slides you could use with some of your principals. And on the last slide, I just want to look at a quote from the book. And this may be a little bit controversial because I know often in some of our leadership work, we're told that we don't have to know much about the content in order to lead something. But I believe there's a certain amount of content that you need to have so you can have really intentional conversations. And this quote says that school leaders, whether they're personally comfortable in math or not, have to be involved if their schools are going to change their students' success with math and sustain that change. And the end of that quote they put in is, we know it works because we've done it. So again, the book represents lived experiences of principals who have done it before. So as we've explored this book and is talking about school improvement, we've considered Miriam's support as a knowledgeable other, and you've kind of listened to my experiences. I hope that you feel encouraged that school improvement in mathematics it's not only doable, but it has momentum that can spill over from school to school. It can spill from school to networks, and board networks can connect with each other. And it really can have an effect on all educators who care about their students' life chances and choices. So whether you engage in this book or not, I hope that you use the webinar resources because it's very clear that principals are key to realize the changes that we want for our students.
Thank you, Joyce. That was a great thought-provoking narrative, and you gave us many rich ideas to consider as leaders in our schools and districts. And I just wanted to mention also that the examples that Joyce gave were from an elementary school, but the book does provide examples from high school as well, complete with analysis criteria. And the handouts that you're going to receive also consider the high school landscape. So I just wanted to point that out. So we began with Moses in the morning, and we looked at the fundamentals of math. And Moses challenged us to consider our understanding of what strong math instruction looks like and what we think of when we hear the term basic math facts. And there was some great discussion in the chat box about that. And he encouraged us to look at the power of and. So maybe it's not either or. Is it possible that it could be and? And he introduced us to the theoretical framework by Stein and Nelson, Leadership, Content, Knowledge. And we tried to weave that framework through Joyce's presentation as well, so that you could see how it's fundamental to the work that you're doing in your schools. Then Joyce took us on a journey of Doug Duff's school transformation and how they dramatically increased their students' math success, and how she, as a principal, was able to duplicate this with similar success. And Joyce highlighted the leadership moves that led to these results. And we hope that you could see yourself in these stories at some point along each of their journeys. So in our final chat room for today, we're going to shift the fans a bit. We've been asking you what strong math instruction looks like, and now we're going to ask you to consider how do you encourage strong math instruction when it is not evident. So there's two text boxes here that we'd like to give you some time to consider now that you have all this information, to give you a moment to reflect. We know the importance of reflecting on our learning, and we know the reality of a busy principal. They don't often have time to do this. So we're going to offer you some time right now. So the two questions: how do you encourage strong math when it is not evident? And the second question is, what actions you can take to create a culture of learning for math success in your school. We always want you to leave with practical, actionable steps that you can use back at your school or district. And we know that we know the benefits of group think, and you get as many ideas out of the other participants in the webinar as your own little team that you may be sitting with. So we're going to give you 5 minutes to work on these two chat boxes, and then I'll come back and wrap up my section. I see lots of good discussion in the chat box, and some people are still typing, so I'll give you one more minute. So some common themes that I see, especially in the question about how do you encourage strong math instruction when it is not evident. A big one is giving time for teachers to meet, offering mentorship if needed and if possible. Co-learning is a big one that we also see in a culture for learning math success. Focusing on student work, and I like the analogy that Joyce used about moving away from moderated marking and giving students work levels into looking at each individual student and where their needs are. We looked at creating non-negotiables for staff, and I think Joyce mentioned that as well. When you have those discussions with teachers, asking them what they got out of our last session together and how you see that evident in their classroom. And then when we move to a culture of learning for math success, again, we see learning alongside teachers, and that was certainly evident in Doug Duff's story. We look at data. Someone mentioned marker students, and we definitely need to make sure that's at the forefront of what we do. Involving parents came up several times, and parents can be our biggest salespeople in our schools and in our communities, so it's really important to have them on side. And letting people make mistakes. That's certainly something that we encourage our teachers to do with their students, and it's important that we as leaders also allow our teachers to make mistakes as they're moving through with their math learning. And so thank you for all your comments. We're going to move to the next slide. And the next slide is also some questions, but we're not going to take time to put them in the chat box. These questions actually were designed by Moses, and they were in his section originally, but we decided to move them to the end of the presentation because we always like to leave you with some food for thought, some possible next steps, and some action items that you can do back at your site. So I'm just going to go through these questions quickly, and again, they're just food for thought for you to consider as you're working back with your schools or districts. So what are some key ideas I want to share with my staff? As we know, and it was mentioned several times in the chat boxes, the key here is to be focused, and in Doug's story, he chose 3 things to focus on. So what are the key ideas I want to share with my staff? Secondly, when might I share these ideas? When is the most appropriate time to share these ideas? And why do I want to share these ideas? And I think it's important that teachers know your why so that they can more clearly understand their why. And how might I assess the current landscape of mathematics instruction in my school? And we know, again, that the data needs to be there so that we can see if our school has actually moved along. So those are just some questions, some food for thought, and I thank Moses for sharing those with us. And I'm going to turn it over to Moses in just a second to share some resources. I just wanted to mention that these 3 resources that Joyce shared in her section of the webinar will be available. Jen will be populating those right as we speak, as well as the resources, some of the resources that Moses is going to talk about right now. So even if you don't want to buy the book, although it's a great book, I have read it, and I wish I had had it when I was a principal. The handouts that Joyce provided from the London West team are excellent, with some excellent guiding questions that you as an administrator or as a leader can use back at your site. So now I'm going to turn it over to Moses.
Thanks, Marianne. Hello, everyone. What I want to do now is just take you through some math resources that may be helpful to you in your schools and districts as you have influence over the professional learning of educators. So on this slide, on the left-hand side, we've listed some guidance to effective instruction that we think can be incredibly helpful to teachers as they are thinking about understanding or getting a better understanding of student learning as it relates to Operation Sense and computational strategies. So these have proven to be tried and true resources developed a number of years ago, but still have incredible relevance to our work today. A lot of the research that I was referring to prior in our session this afternoon are cited in these documents. So I would encourage you to maybe look in your own school libraries or office libraries, board libraries rather, to see if you have copies of these. They are also available online. And I'll give you that website. I think we have another slide actually with the website on there where you can find those. Another ministry resource that's available to all of you is Tips for Math. The focus of Tips for Math is really on grades 4 to 8 and grade 9 applied, and the focus there is around blended learning. So we encourage you to take a look at those resources. And then finally we have Mathies, which is a website that houses games, some learning tools and activities. So if students are exploring particular mathematical ideas and they want to model them, there are some great learning tools in Mathies that allow for them to explore those models, manipulate those models, and as they develop some understanding around those mathematical concepts that underlie the models. I believe Bob already spoke to, at the bottom part of the slide, is the EQAO report that was recently published. I encourage you to take a look at that so that you can get a sense of how our current assessments in the province think about the fundamentals. So when they looked at the assessment results, I guess from last year, and they applied the fundamentals of math lens on it, they drew some, I think, interesting conclusions, or made some interesting observations rather, not conclusions, but observations, that I think can be absolutely helpful to us as we think about positioning the fundamentals of math and expanding our understanding of the basics. Jen, we can go on to the next slide. Another good resource that I'd like to bring to your attention is a research monograph. So historically, as a ministry, we have been able to provide a platform through the Council of, I think it was, no, it's not Code. I'm sorry, it's deans. Deans of faculties of education are able to showcase some of their researchers in their various departments and their various faculties to share what they've learned in their research and possible application for the classroom. One of our more recent monographs, I guess in the last couple of years that was published, was by Lawson. And in this monograph, she does a brilliant job of explaining how we can help our students better master basic math facts rather. And that I think she does a brilliant job of doing is showing us that, for example, when students are adding and they're learning how to add and they're learning their addition facts, let's use the fact 3 plus 4 is the same as 7 or equals 7. Students in early primary grades, they may count out a set of 3, and then they may count out a second set of 4 things, and then they'll count the whole set, put them together and then count them again. So in essence, they're counting 3 times to model that expression and to come up with a sum. And historically, I think there was a time probably where we knew, okay, well, if kids can do that and they can count and come up with that sum, then we can probably move towards memorization of the fact 3 plus 4. And what I think Dr. Lawson does a brilliant job of doing is showing us that there's actually this really broad territory in between that counting 3 times to memorization that we run the risk of jumping over too quickly. And when we do, then we actually lose the opportunity to really develop some deep conceptual understanding that leads to things like additive thinking and multiplicative thinking, which is kind of the root of our rational number system. I'm be able to understand some of how proportions work. So, yes, so sorry, you could hear the math AQ instructor coming out of me. But I'd encourage you to take a look at this monograph and just see what Dr. Lawson offers to our educators out there about how we might think about teaching math facts. And finally, I want to share with you a product. This is a bit of a preview. I had the opportunity to be part of the development. Well, actually, I wasn't in the development. I was more in the just the kind of sharing about this resource. What we're calling it is the Teacher's Guide Resource Companion. So the fundamentals of math, when it was released or shared broadly, it was positioned within a teacher's guide. And what we have done is we've taken this teacher's guide and we've created separate, I guess, PDFs of each page. And if you, in a digital format, if you click on particular sections of this digital page, it actually will take you to some videos that are housed on the Learning Exchange that illuminate the point or the theories, the understandings behind what was written in the Fundamentals of Math Teacher's Guide. So what I'm going to have Jen share with you in just a moment is a video that walks you through how that kind of works. My understanding is that it's not fully public yet, but I did get authorization to share this with you as a preview. My understanding is that once it is fully public, we'll be sending it out to all of you, a link to this resource to all of you once it's made publicly available. So I'll turn things over to Jen so she can walk you through the next steps so that you can view the video.
Thanks, Moses. So I just wanted to let folks know that we are about to start the video. Before I do so,
in the fall of
please make sure that
2018,
your
the Ministry of
computer speakers are
Education
on.
released
If you,
Focusing on the
have
Fundamentals
muted
of
your Adobe
Math,
Connect,
a Teacher's Guide.
sound so that
This
you weren't
resource
getting
is meant to
duplicate
give a
audio,
context for
if you're
K-8
listening
math
in on the
teaching
phone.
in
You
Ontario,
can simply
and
turn
to
on
highlight
the
what we
sound by
mean when
clicking
we
on
say
that
the
speaker
fundamentals of
icon at the
math.
top of your Adobe
This
Connect
guide is
screen so that
intended
it's
to be
green.
short and to the point,
In order
but
to
of
hear
course
the
there's
video,
much more to
your
math
Adobe
learning.
Connect audio
There's a
needs to be
richness
on,
behind
as well
each
as your
statement
computer
that an
speakers.
educator could really
And
dig
I'm
into.
going to start the video
To help
now.
with this, we're introducing the Resource Companion to the Teacher's Guide. It's here where you can do that digging. In this companion, we provide additional learning, research, and classroom-based ideas to support the implementation of the fundamentals of math. In order to access the resources, just click on a page of the guide here. Click on any highlighted area to see the supporting resources to that statement. At the top, you'll see the content of the text you just clicked, and below, you'll see a variety of supports related to it. First, there's a series of videos supporting the statement above. These are short clips arranged in subtopics. There are both videos from math learning experts and classroom examples. The videos have been ordered so that they have a logical flow if watched in order, or it's just fine to watch any individual video that you're interested in. Many of these videos come from a larger set. If you're interested in seeing more in the set, check out the video sources link. Below, you'll find text-based resources that support the same statement. This section not only provides links to the ministry published documents, but lists specific sections that are relevant. When you click on the link, it will take you to the specific page reference. The whole document is still there in case you want to save it. The link opens in a different browser tab, so you'll always be able to get back. You can use this link to get back to the guide page and continue to explore. We hope that you find these additional targeted resources helpful. Thanks for watching.
Thanks so much, Jen. Sorry, I needed to mute my my computer. So I just want to reiterate again that once this is fully public, you will be receiving a link to this resource, and then at that point, you're welcome to share freely with your educators that you work with. I think that's it for me. I'm going to turn things over to Mary now.
Thank you, Moses. You know, I think some of us are feeling this has been very affirming, and I was looking at some of the comments in the chat that a lot of you are starting to do this work and feel confident that you're on the right path. But certainly a lot of the rich resources, the questioning, possibilities, I think are going to help all of us push our thinking forward. So thank you for doing that. I'm going to talk to you about additional resources besides all the math ones that we've shared with you. And I want to start with the lead on, which was the two-pager that you received with a log of instructions. And Jen also has it, I think, in the downloadable files. This is a very, and we have two people who are helping us with this. They're both on the steering team. And they've put one together for each of our sessions. Really the power of this, we always talk about how important it is to codify what we're doing. I think there was somebody who was saying that they've asked, asked the teacher and they couldn't articulate. And many of us sort of are on automatic pilot. So here what we try to do is really to codify the good work that we do and make it explicit. We also try to make connections between the research and the practical pieces, which we know are very important with this publication, and also the connections between each of our sessions. It was great to hear our presenters talk about, the importance of parents being engaged, and so we try to build on each of the sessions, even though we have a specific focus. So that's excellent, and that lead-on also has some really good deep questions that you can work on with your staff. Besides the lead-on, we have district facilitation, so we are here to support your work at the school and district level. Our district facilitators, I know the model is a little different. We can't be sending people out for face-to-face, but certainly we are available to support your work, so don't hesitate to ask Linda and myself if you're needing support in this area. We have our LSA website where all our resources are archived. You know that we're taping this recording every session, and then it will be available on the site with all the additional resources. Now Linda and I also send out to the system leaders and to participants a package for each of the sessions with all the resources and PowerPoints and anything else, a link to the recording. But if you wanted to go and visit it there, it's going to be housed in that website as well. The Learning Exchange, I'm not going to say a lot about it because I know it's been mentioned various times. But again, with videos, digital resources, paper resources, it's a wonderful place to go for educators who are short on time. And you can find something really quick there that you can use for whatever focus you're having. Fundamental math resources, I know Moses, thank you very much for reviewing those that are available from the ministry and elsewhere. And again, you've got the link there, and you'll have a copy of this PowerPoint so you can just go in afterwards and get some of this if you didn't have a chance to download it all. And just a comment about the downloadables. We are going to give you a little more additional time than we usually do because there are a lot pieces there, but don't worry if you don't have time right after the session. You will be receiving this through various methods. And then the book, we're not in the business of selling the book, but for those of you who are interested, I know I'm going to be purchasing a copy. I haven't had a chance to do that. It is available to you, and in the chat window on the right, there were various options there as to where you could get it. Moving on to the next piece. Future sessions. We have our parent engagement, and we include in that the family path from the theory of action on April the 24th, a morning and afternoon session. Really important, again, that hopefully some of you will join. And, you know, I know we have a team right now that is working to create this virtual session. And they're looking at math and knowledge building and all the other pieces that we've done to try to really make this seamless and build on what we've learned. And I'm not going to use the word expert, because I would agree with you, Joyce, and also I want you to know that I was listening. But on the knowledgeable other, we are going to have a special guest speaker. Debbie Pusher is going to be leading some of the learning that day, and she's world-renowned, and you know, really, we're very happy that she was able to join us. She's very excited. She's worked with many boards in Ontario and beyond, and so she is going to be our guest for that day on parent engagement. On May the 1st, we have a knowledge building session, morning and afternoon again, and many of you have been already involved. We had a previous one, and this is going to be our second one. And we're offering this mostly to people who are already doing knowledge building. It was great to hear Moses talk a little bit about this. There are people who are kind of just listening in, trying to figure out if they can build knowledge building into the work that they're doing. So you're welcome to register for that. And on May the 29th, we have the monitoring piece. And we know how important data is, how important monitoring is to the work that we do to make sure that really it is having the right kind of impact. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on that particular day. And leadership is always at the heart of our project, because we are a leadership project, and it's formal and informal leadership. So you don't have to be an SO or a principal, but if you're a teacher leader that has a specific role, this may help you as well. And then in June, we haven't firmed up a topic yet, but we are hoping to offer something that would kind of, I think, be the culmination to the year, and also maybe, you know, coming full circle. And hopefully, if we know anything by then about the following year, we would incorporate some of that into that session. So I would like to encourage you, because this morning we had over 66 connections, this afternoon over 50 at one time. And so registrations, you know, are highly sought after. So when Linda and I send out the registration information, we highly encourage you to register your teams as soon as possible. And now I'm going to pass this on to Linda to complete the afternoon.
Thank you very much, Mary. And as we wrap up here today, I want to thank the team who put together and actually presented our session itself. So Mary and I, who are the bookends, and then there's Jennifer giving us some real expertise in terms of the technical support. Thank you, Jennifer. And Marianne and Bob, who are facilitators with LSA, are part of the planning team, along with Moses and Joyce. And Moses and Joyce had major sections, each of which gave us some very valuable insights into ways in which we can create a great culture for mathematics learning in your schools, in your classrooms, and I would say in your districts. So as we wrap up here, two things. We're going to leave this open for at least the next 12 minutes, and I point out that the downloadables are there and ready to be downloaded. We're giving you time for that. But the most important part is our feedback form, which is a SurveyMonkey. And this is where you're given an opportunity to talk about what works for you in this session itself, what you learned, what your impression of this session is, but also to tell us what further ways can we support you in your work in mathematics or other topics that LSA can consider in terms of providing you with some focused learning around those other topics. So please click on, everyone, click on, it doesn't matter whether you're a principal, an SO, a director, a student achievement officer, an education officer, on the steering team, or facilitator, please click and give us your insights so that we can use your feedback going forward and make every virtual session that we do the best that it can be. So thank you, everyone, and I wish you the best of the rest of the afternoon. Pretty soon we're going to sign off, and I think I just turn it over to Jen for the final words.
Thank you so much, Linda. So just in terms of accessing the downloadable files, I just wanted to give a bit of instruction with respect to that. All you have to do is simply click on any of the files that you would like. You would have to do it one at a time, and once you click on the file, the Download Files button becomes activated so that you're able to click on that Download Files button and save and select where you'd like to save it on your computer. As Linda and Mary had mentioned, these resources, as well as the link to the recording and the chat transcripts, will be emailed out to you at a later date as well. But please take a few moments to download any of the files that you would like.